controversial advice. And how can we actually shift the dynamic to empower the people that give birth? Stick around because we're going to unpack this on today's episode. Hi, my name is Lovetti Lafua, and on today's episode we'll break down the science and myth and the real life experiences around childbirth. What does science really say about early labor? We're going to unpack the most misunderstood aspect of childbirth, and that is early labor. The early stage of labor, or the latent phase of labor, was actually introduced as a clinical concept to distinguish the different stages of labor. And this is something that's quite interesting for everyone who works around women, especially the birthing women. The research shows that clinical assessment as well as cervical dilation doesn't necessarily say how the labor will progress. That being said, there are some very groundbreaking research that were introduced, including Simpson et al. In 2017 and Charlotte et al. In 2021. This is something that's quite interesting for everyone who works around women, especially the birthing women. Research shows that clinical assessment of contractions as well as cervical dilation doesn't necessarily say how the labor will progress. The experience of early labor is deeply personal. It varies from woman to woman. But here's a kicker. What is early labor? If the whole labor phase lasts for about 2 hours, then when did the early labor actually happen? This therefore begs the question, should we therefore still hold to the old dogma of Emanuel Friedman? Or should we re-examine what we thought we knew all along? The idea that a textbook definition can actually dictate a woman's personal experience is fundamentally flawed in my opinion. I'm sure there are many women out there who feel the same. Physiologically speaking, early labor is a critical transition period. As Dr. Sarah Buckley, a renowned childbirth expert, explains our neocortex, the thinking part of our brain, and its engagement throughout our labor process.
I talk about the hormonal physiology of labour and birth, how Mother Nature designs our bodies in labour and birth for safety, ease and pleasure, how the ecstatic hormones of undisturbed birth, as I call them, work, the hormones oxytocin, beta-endorphin, adrenaline and noradrenaline, and prolactin, function during labour and birth, and how they contribute to safety, ease and pleasure.
The brain engaged in the labour process. It allows us to assess our surrounding. We find a safe place to give birth, much like the way mammals do in the nature. Alright, here is where things get really interesting. If a woman is overstimulated, she's anxious, or she's moving too much, it's most likely that her oxytocin level will reduce. And this, in my opinion, would definitely slower the contractions process itself. And this explains the so-called stalled labor. Birth is mostly transferred from home birth to hospital. Once a woman and her neurocortex is settled down, the limbic system or the limbic brain takes over and the contractions intensifies. The shift of control awareness to deep immersion of the birthing process. Here is where things get a little bit tricky. Research from Journal of Midwifery and Women's Health in 2020 shows that women who are admitted to the early phase of labor face a significant high likelihood of having interventions. And in most cases, this intervention includes cesarean. And here is why. Some argue that the women themselves have already had a very long labor or a history of long labor. Others suggest that the medical interventions create a cascade effect. This effect to stop the natural progression of birth. And of course, let us be really real here. The hospitals actually operate a very efficient model. It means, therefore, longer labor strains resources as well as staffs. Therefore, this has led to a situation where women are told to stay at home as long as possible. Very little guidance on how to do that confidently. For many women, staying at home is easier said than done. Studies from Baker et al. In 2018 and Carlson in 2019 state that most women go to the hospital not because they know that the baby is being born yet, but simply because they want to have the reassurance to know that the baby is safe and that they're progressing as they should. I strongly believe that due to fear-mongering around pregnant women and childbirth, this is the result. In my opinion, the hospital sends a very mixed signals. One, we're the expert. You don't have to come to us until you're far along. Also, hospital is the best place to give birth. It's the safest place. But hey, you have to stay at home as long as possible. And finally, labor is quite unpredictable, and so you can actually give birth in the park, if you want to. And these are the kind of messages that women get. All right, on my final thoughts, we have to reclaim birth as an intuitive process. Oh yeah? You heard me right. Labor is not a one-size thing that everybody has the same fit. What I always tell women that it is not a one-size fit for every experience because everyone is an individual. And just like our face, our bodies are as well. The current maternity model has been designed around the institutional needs, not for the physiological and emotional well-being of women that are birthing. But there is a good news. Change is possible. Midwives, doulas, researchers, and people like Dr. Rachel Reed and Michael Oden, and even a very prominent midwife like Ina May Gaskin, are advocating for the system to respect the natural process of a woman's body rather than forcing through the timeline of a birth that is artificial.